This week on Dig Me Out.
Need someone to say, don't think about it. It's not a word unless it's true. What does it take?
With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, I don't know if I've done this. I think I might have done this, but I don't know. I don't remember. Jim Copany, Tank Boy, joined us at Patreon, and I can't remember if I welcomed him to the union.
Right. Well, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to do it twice.
So I'm just going to do it at the start of every episode now. It's just going to be like a recurring thing where we welcome Jim Copany to the Dig Me Out Union.
We just randomly pick somebody else.
Right. Well, it's going to be like Jimmy Kimmel and Matt Damon when he says at the end of the show, like, apologies to Matt Damon for bumping. I'm gonna do that literally until somebody stops me. Speaking of the union, it's my patented segue to get to our union members.
Very smooth.
Thank you very much. Joining us for this episode. In the past, Jay, the albums he has brought to us include UMI's Hi-Fi Way, Evans'
Check.
Less is More, Ammonia's Mint 400, and
Right.
Powderfinger's Double Allergic. Now, do you notice a common thread amongst those records, Jay?
Australian?
They're all Australian. So, is it 5 for 5? Is it 5 for 5, Jay? No. It's not. He threw a curveball at us this time. If for those of us who are not familiar with American baseball, you might say in cricket, you might say I don't know. I watched cricket once and I was so confused, and I tried to understand it, and then somebody said like it will take you like a full year to understand all the rules of cricket.
Wow.
But I was engrossed for like 4 hours watching cricket on like Fox Sports 7 one afternoon.
It seems exciting.
It is. It's wildly exciting, but I have no idea what the rules are. It's so confusing. Let's totally got off on a cricket
I'm with you.
tangent. Welcome back to the show, Darren Leach. How are you, Darren?
Doing well. So it's a Sunday here. Sunday, what is it? 5 p.m.
Yes.
My lovely girlfriend Federica is joining as well.
Hello,
Give her a female's
Federica.
voice.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We went for a nice bike ride today. It was actually quite sunny in London today. So
nice.
Sloane Square, which is famous for being in the late 70s where the punks hung out, but now it's very expensive to live in. So
Of course.
yeah, with a lot of luxury flats and a lot of fake lips. So there you go.
Yeah.
That's exactly. I mean, that's CBGB's in New York is like now a condo.
There you go.
So it's all the punk spaces get turned into gentrified, cool urban hipster hangout places. They suck the soul out of them. I can totally understand. So, as I mentioned, you did not go with your fifth pick as an Australian band. You threw us a curveball. Could you share with our audience who you picked for this episode?
Okay, so I picked a band called Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry, that old tongue twister. And the album's called Blasting Off. It was their final album from 91 or 92. We were talking about this earlier, not too sure when it actually officially came out, but their fifth and final record. And they're from Leeds, up in North UK.
That's right. And as you mentioned, this is their fifth album. They actually formed in 1981. This is one of the rare situations, Jay, where we're talking about a 90s band, but really the majority of their career was in the 80s. And this was the last record. It was literally like they finished making the record and we're like, we're done. We're out of here. Never talking to you people again.
Well, that's what it was.
Yeah, this a little bit of history.
History of the band.
On Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry. They formed in Leeds, like I mentioned, in 1981. It was originally Chris Reed, guitarist and songwriter, along with vocalist Mark Sweeney, bassist Steve Smith, and drummer Mick Brown. Mick Brown would later go and join the Mission.
Yeah.
Sweeney left the band, and Chris Reed took over as the lead vocalist. And then they added another guitar player. And then this would continue for a long time, where there would be a lot of people in and out of the band. For only 5 records over about 10 years, the list of people who are not in the band anymore is like 3 times as long as people who were actually in the band.
True.
Dave Wolfenden was in it, I guess, the longest next to Chris Reed, but he's not on the record we're talking about. This was a completely new lineup. Chris Reed was like, everybody out, I'm starting over. So on this record, it's Gary Waite on bass guitar and keyboards, George Schultz on, it says acoustic drums and percussion. It's very specific that it says acoustic drums as opposed to electronic drums. I don't know why that needed to specify. And then this is my favorite part. Corky, spelled K-O-R-K, is given the credits of beatbox and general brain damage.
Okay.
I saw that. What's that mean?
I don't know. I feel like him and Bez from Happy Mondays should form like this group of guys who don't actually play an instrument in a band, but are there as a member of the band. Right. Like the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones had the guy who just danced in a suit the whole time.
They just bring the vibes.
They just bring the vibes. Like that should be, if there's a musicians union and you're like, what is my role in the band? It should just be vibes and not the instrument, like a vibraphone. But
right. Cosmic type.
Yes. This was released on a small indie label called Sparkhead, which doesn't even have its own Wikipedia page. That's how small this label is. They actually recorded this in LA, which is interesting because I don't know why.
Well, they rarely toured the US. So.
They rarely toured the US. This didn't come out in the US for a couple years after the actual release. Okay. They were on, their first album came out in 85, and that was on Red Rhino Records, which was an indie label in the UK. And then I think at one point, didn't they sign to like Beggar's Banquet or with, yeah, they were with the third record. Yeah. That's when they were with Situation 2, which was like an offshoot of Beggar's Banquet. But they got Beggar's distribution, which is what was important. And like I mentioned, they did break up after this record was made. I think there was like a sort of a reunion, or at least like the guy, Chris, revived the band name for some new songs on the internet, probably through MySpace back in 2004, I'm guessing.
Yep.
And there's been like a DVD that came out.
Yeah, there was like a retrospective box set in 2014.
And Chris Reed has put out stuff under the name Chris Reed Unit, which is an interesting choice of band names. And but I don't have a whole lot after that from him, so I don't know. Do you guys know if he's up to anything else or
what that? He did release a solo album, just acoustic stuff, and there was some Red Lorry. Let's call them the Lorries. The Lorries, acoustic versions on that. But I read that they reformed in 2003, and that Dave Wolfenberg, or whatever his name is, rejoined the band.
Okay.
And they last gigged in 2015, and there's nothing after that. Chris has done some solo stuff after that.
Wolfie as well.
But
collaborating as well with other American artists, actually. I don't know. I don't remember the name of that.
Yeah, they've all got these other bands that they're working with. But the Lorries, 2015, done. Yeah. They were apparently big in Germany. I was looking at set list of them and heaps of gigs in Germany.
It's them and Hasselhoff. Those are like the two biggest artists. Now you did something interesting. You suggested this and it got into our January poll.
Correct.
But then it was like clear it wasn't going to win.
Yeah.
And you were like, screw it. I'm making it my pick.
Correct,
So it
correct.
actually it got some comments in that January poll, which I'm going to dig up now.
Oh, cool. I missed those.
And
Gavin, on the release while you're doing that, Tim.
Yeah,
the release on Apple Music is through Rhino, and it's funny because it also has the conflicting dates. There's both a 91 date and a 92 date.
There you go.
In the listing. So
on the main page for the band, it says that the album was released in 92, but when you click on the link to go to the album, it says 91.
Yeah.
So they're just messing with us at this point. That's what's happening. So Gavin Reed said, cool list. I actually own 6 of these. I listened to them all and liked them, which is a first. I disregarded Quicksand and Soul Coughing as those bands have been covered. I voted for the Wonder Stuff and Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry, as I feel they play music that has been least represented here. Yes, I'm finally doing multiple votes despite not liking it. It's like taking medicine. He's like, I understand the importance, but I don't like the flavor of this cough syrup. He said, I do hope we get some Love Battery at some point. We did. We got some Love Battery. We ended up getting
that was
to
a good album, by the way. Yeah. I've never heard them before, but yeah.
And I think that might have been it, because unfortunately that they lost to Letters to Cleo and Quicksand and only got 4 votes in that poll. So we didn't get to them.
Fans out there, so good on them.
There, exactly. Jay, had you ever heard this band before? I had not.
I had not. In fact, the band name is kind of terrible to the point where I was questioning whether this is a real thing. I was like, all right, is Darren fucking with us? Because this doesn't sound like a real band. And then I looked it up and their whole catalog was on Apple Music. I was like, all right, here we go.
I guess it's real.
I had never heard of them.
What's funny is that the first time I put it on, I go, I kind of feel like I've heard this before, but I don't know why. And I could not trace where that would have come from. It's just like maybe his voice sounded familiar, but it might have been just because of another vocalist that sounds close to him. Yeah. The only thing that made me think, oh, I've heard this band, is if the beginning of the song Talking Back, and we'll get into the review in a second.
Yeah.
I was like, what does that sound like? What does that sound like? And then I was like, it sounds like some sort of 90s or 80s alternative band. And I can't remember what it sounds like. I was like, is that the Talking Heads? And then I went to the Talking Heads albums and I was like scrolling through on Spotify. I'm like, oh, this kind of sounds like the beginning of Wild Wild Life by the Talking Heads. Just that like steady drum beat with the dan it. That's the only thing I could compare them, like in terms of like, oh, what does this sound like? That was it. Nothing else came up. So there you go. Let's do what we do, Jay. Let's talk about this album. Enough for the fluff. Tell me one thing you liked about Blasting Off by Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry.
I connected with the strong guitar leads and melodies, and then the interplay with this vocal that's dark, a little gothy. It's a very deep delivery. I guess my touch point for it would be like the relationship between Ian Astbury and Billy Duffy of the Cult, where you've got this, really melodic, catchy guitar that, sometimes gets a little affected and atmospheric, but also can cut through and be, pretty anthemic. And then you've got this singer that's singing in this lower tone, can be super emotive. I think Astbury has a lot more range than's represented here, but that dynamic between the two of those elements of the band to me was really worked well. And the guitars are not only hooky and sort of pull you into the melody, they're also kind of hypnotic and atmospheric. They blur between like popping out and really grabbing your ear with something and then dropping back and being this bed of either like kind of stabbing notes or droney things to just create this sort of middle layer of dark atmosphere on the record. I think that also really complements the vocal a ton. The two come together to really, create something new out of the elements and pieces and parts they're putting together. I like the vocal a lot. I think that's probably the strongest part of the record for me. Like right away, I'm a sucker for this kind of delivery. especially when it's done in a really melodic way, which this does, to the point where like a song, you start with "This Is Energy," which is kind of this brooding delivery, and you think you're in for a pretty dark record, but then you get to something like "Train of Hope," which is almost Simple Minds-ish, and it gets very hooky.
On a train, on a train, train, on a train, I'll forget about you. On a train, on a train, on a train, I'll forget about you. You say you want me, but where I just don't know. You say you need me, but I just feel alone. Nothing could change round here, it's going on too slow. I feel the engine, and it's pulling me to hope.
And sort of elevates to this other more pop-ish kind of place that I didn't necessarily think the album could get to, but I think both ends of that were working pretty well. I think there's some great vocal performances on here as well, getting a little emotive in my mind, even maybe getting to a higher tone and getting out of the sort of the bellowy kind of vibe. And then underneath, I think there's some pretty good driving rhythms and song structures going on here. It's on Fire and Train of Hope are good examples of, they kick out of that drone a bit and they kind of go in and out of it, which I think is really effective for an album. So you're not stuck in one mode. They can, put a little energy into things from a rhythm section standpoint and amp stuff up a little bit, which plays well, I think, with his vocal delivery as well to kind of push it. So you're not stuck in this kind of mid-tempo, droney kind of place. So yeah, those are some of the things that came together for me. I think overall it's a pretty unique sounding record, even though I can hear things here and there of other bands. I think the way it comes together, it's at times it's even shoegazy. So I think it brings together a lot of elements in a very unique way. What worked for you, Tim?
Well, a lot of what you said, I think I found myself listening to this record and going, okay, this is obviously like a post-punk kind of gothy influenced band. But then I was listening to This Is Energy. And if you speed that up just a little bit, that's the Stooges, that guitar riff. And he has an Iggy Pop almost vocal, not in the terms of his cadence, but just in his just that deep voice.
Yeah.
And I started to hear that element of the band where there's definitely a proto-punkish vibe to this record that is mixed in with the reverb gives it that gothy, and with his vocal, it gives you that big echoing kind of, especially when headphones on, you hear it a lot more presently with regards to the big echo sound in his vocal. But that worked really well for me because sometimes I listen to those bands like The Mission or whatever, and I'm like, I just want a little more beef to this. I want a little more teeth to this guitar part or that. And this band really hit that. And I'm guessing it's Chris Reed doing the majority of the songwriting and arranging and all that kind of stuff, since he basically hired the band for this record. And that it just works on that level. These are very energetic songs, It's on Fire and Don't Think About It. I think the thing that caught my ear was after listening to it over and over again, either on speakers or with my headphones, there's some really cool hooks on this record that come back that I wasn't expecting, especially for, this sounds super 80s in terms of production, but not so much that it's when we did that Lime Spiders record for the 80s episode to wrap up last year, there was so much reverb and it was so drenched in that you were oh, I kind of need you to dial that back a little bit so I can actually hear what's going on with some of his stuff. But he's got the right amount where, it sounds like it doesn't belong in 1991 per se, but there were bands in that era that we've talked about, that like 90, 91, it still had that like element of 80s production.
Yeah.
And you got it a little bit with this record.
I think the reverb and delay sound like an instrument on this record. Like they're using it to blend things together and to create a mood and a bed for the rest of for the rest of the instruments to live in. Sometimes, especially in this era, early 90s, that reverb becomes a hindrance. Like it's unnecessary, so.
And you mentioned Simple Minds. I mean, it's obvious to connect them to other 80s bands because of the production and his voice, but I also got some like Psychedelic Furs, especially the stuff that Richard Butler did, like a lot with that like Love Spit Love album that we talked about years ago. He's got that big deep voice. He writes interesting phrases and melodies that almost sound speaky at times. They aren't always just crooning.
Yep.
And it, in the way that I love Richard Butler because he's so unique, I dug the way that Chris Reed was singing on this record as well.
Yep.
So there was a lot to dig. You mentioned, Darren, that you and Federica have sort of gotten into this band in the last couple of years. What works best for both of you on this record?
For me, I think what drew me in was the guitar tones. I think because we were just discovering all these kind of alt 80s bands, like there was Sad Lovers and Giants. I don't know if you know any of these, but Sad Lovers and Giants. There was Snake Corpse, the Chameleons you might be familiar with. I got into them a while ago, but like, yeah, Sad Lovers and Giants, Snake Corpse, The Sound, bands like that. I think I was just trying to, I just love that sound. So, and then these guys came along. We think we discovered them from Spotify. How they do that. If you like this band, you like this band. So I think we just discovered them by then. But for me, it was just, the guitar tone was just so good. The first album I got into, Talk About the Weather, and then obviously I loved it, and just I'm still that guy who wants to know what else is in the catalog and will just listen to something endlessly and listen to all the B-sides and all that kind of thing. But for me, the guitar tone works so well with his voice, and then you got the bass just thumping away and the drums, and nothing's too loud. Everything just is at the right levels. And I love the tracks like I Can See Stars and Talking Back. I just think those are magnificent. And obviously Chris has a knack for a guitar riff. Like, this is the fifth album. Yeah. The fifth album since, well, I know they formed in 81, but the first album came out in 85. It was just like, hey, how are you still writing really cool guitar licks, 5 albums in? How was that not really, used on the first or second album? So just shows he's, got a knack for that. Pass on to Federica.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of you in respect of the sound. So what I like is this sort of dichotomy you can find between the voice, which is pretty calm, so never gets angry, and the sound, which is much stronger. I love that. And this is something that really struck me when I heard the album first time. Second thing for me is lyrics. So I really put a lot of attention to lyrics. And what I like is that they're not just talking about love as usual. It's something that I really don't like most of the time in bands. So what I like is that he's basically talking about the world around him. So how he feels about what's happening around him. And one thing that he's saying is what's happening to this world, which really struck me, because in this sense, it's something that I can relate to. And I liked it. And I said, yeah, I think the same, which is kind of weird because we normally have a very romantic idea of the 90s. So somebody who's saying that in the 90s, is like, oh, so they already thought that there was something going wrong. And that's why I mainly like them. And another thing is the length of the album. I think 40 minutes is 39 something.
10 track.
It's absolutely perfect. Gives you the vibe. It's amazing. You have the experience of the album. You have the time to take in it and then think about it. One thing that I probably no, I'm sure I didn't like it. It's the cover album, and it's lazy.
Oh, the cover.
It's just weird.
The cover art.
Sorry about that. That was a little bit lazy, in my opinion. But yeah.
Yeah, you have no idea what the band's going to sound like based on that album cover.
Exactly.
This is
even the name, Blasting Off.
This is a problem we're running into. The last record we did with Letters to Cleo, that album cover was terrible. We're reaching that point in some 90s records where you're like, this is a bad album cover.
I think we need to make that part of our review going forward. It's pretty interesting to look at sometimes when the album art, especially for bands that were underappreciated or, sort of under the radar, which we focus on. In this period, you're finding bands sometimes flipping through bins at stores and buying records based on album covers or what you think they might sound like. So it certainly doesn't help in this era if your album cover is just like nondescript or not good.
It looks like, I don't know, was it a compass on top of like a red?
There's some
raindrops.
Drops. Yeah,
I think that's supposed to. Maybe that's metal, water on metal. I'm not sure the way it's beating, but it's like it doesn't tell you anything. It could be, it could be anything. This record. So yeah, that it needed a.
It can be the front of the truck with the lorry.
Can you explain what a lorry is for our English, or not English, but our American listeners? Because I don't think everybody knows what a lorry is.
I didn't think about that. Well, in Australia, we call them semi-trailers. So they're just trucks, really. I don't know what do you call it? But bigger trucks.
Semis. Tractor trailer. So this is basically red truck, yellow truck is the name of the band.
There's a singles collection from '95 where the cover is a red truck and a yellow truck.
Yeah, that's true. So and they're facing that way.
It is right on the nose.
Yeah.
I mean, they should have been using truck imagery for like basically every album cover, but like in different ways. Like get one of those like Rat Fink album covers with the drawing of like the rat on a tractor trailer in that cartoon style of the 1970s. Like you gotta play that up, because otherwise you're just like, I wouldn't pick this up in a CD bin in the 90s because I'd be flipping through and I'd be like, I don't know what that is.
Well, even now, if you're flipping through a bin here, right, and you have no idea what this band is, the album cover is not going to help you say like, oh, this is probably a 90s band or something I might be interested in. I should pick it up for $1. Like
I think the name, you'd just go, no, Red Lorry. Yeah. What? That's a stupid thing. Yeah.
It's probably from a riddle in
it's a tongue.
England.
It's a tongue twister.
Tongue twister, yeah.
So Red Lorry, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, red lorry, yellow lorry. You can't say it. You say that fast 10 times. You can't.
Red lorry, yellow lorry, 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 red lorry, yellow lorry.
There you go.
I concentrated really hard.
Yeah,
you need to take a nap now.
I knew I needed my afternoon nap. Is going to come early. Jay,
yeah.
How did you feel about the rhythm section of this band in terms of performance?
I like the variation in bass tones. I think that helped a lot. In fact, they even bring in some synth bass, which I think works really well. The drumming is pretty sterile. At times, I think they're probably using a drum machine. I think that's probably why there's a distinction you said earlier between live drums or performance and an actual drum machine.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly not it's a fine enough bed. I think it's certainly not the star of the record. I think it's a bed for the guitars and the vocals. doesn't contribute a ton.
Yeah, that's how I kind of felt. Like there's a lot of energy in the guitar. I think hitting on the Cult was a really good combination, like or comparison with the way that like Billy Duffy would write, like really powerful, interesting guitar parts. Sometimes the drums weren't always up to what he was doing, and I feel like it's the same way.
Yeah,
like I think sterile is the right way. There's just like not a ton of interesting stuff going on with the drums, and I think that's the downside of this production. Is like even when you just have solid drums, because they are, echoing or you get that reverb, it makes them sound big. But then making them sound big also makes them more apparent, and you're like, oh well, there's not much going on there.
What so you're listening to a different source than me, right? You have files.
Yes.
So my biggest issue with this record is I'm listening to it lossless, streaming through Apple Music, so super high quality. I don't know if it's a transfer issue or if this is just the way it's recorded, but it is very noisy and not like there's a lot of vocal sibilance. Like you hear him like a lot of pops and the whole middle of the record where there's like all this ambient stuff going on in atmosphere. It sounds like, especially when you listen to it loud, it sounds like a bad MP3.
Ooh.
Did that come across to you at all?
There were a couple points where that synth bass
Yeah.
sounded like it was cracking in like just little tiny parts here and there. It was like, and I was like, is that the transfer, or is that what the synth bass was doing?
The version I'm listening to, like most of the vocals and even some of the lead guitars are like that through the whole record. Like they're almost peaking. I mean, they are. Like you're hearing them distort and like break up, and then when you listen to like I said, that middle stuff, you start to notice like, wow, this sounds like a really poor quality MP3 from 2002 that you would have downloaded on Napster. So had I had the files like you had, I would have just assumed like, oh, this is just a low quality file. But I'm listening to it lossless through Apple Music, and it sounds that way. And I'm wondering if there was a transfer issue at some point, or if this is the way the record's supposed to sound. Darren, what does it sound like to you? Do you notice any stuff like that, or does it sound pretty clean?
Mine's from an MP3. No, I've listened to in cans and on speakers. And hey, next time I'm actually going to take a closer listen. But I didn't notice that at all, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we just got bad versions.
Well, it makes me wonder now that we talked about the history of this record, the release being fuzzy. Rhino isn't, I don't know, my impression of them is not always high in quality. Like they're mostly a distribution label that finds archival stuff and puts it out. And I'm wondering if maybe there's a technical issue going on here, because it's, when you listen to the vocal, it's very obvious. Like a lot of the times, like it is definitely peaking. All the stuff that you try to take out of our podcast, Tim, when we, you're hot on the mic, and it breaks up and it sounds bad. Like a lot of it sounds like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just looking to see like what the release was for. So they did do like a vinyl version, which came out on Death Wish Office Records.
Okay.
And then what's weird is on Discogs, they only have CD releases for the US and Germany.
Yeah.
and in Europe, it's a album, LP. And then you can also get it on cassette in the US. How many people have it on cassette?
Well, that label, it was a German label.
Okay.
So when I see, because Discogs isn't always 100% right. I think it was just German pressing for the European market.
Got it.
Which is very common. So.
I just find it odd that there was no CD version that is marked for Europe. I mean, I'm sure the German version was out there, but
yeah,
right after the wall fell. But those Germans were busy with our stuff.
Being a UK band, they'd get distribution here. So
gotcha. Is there anything that doesn't work on the record for you guys, or things that bother you with either the production or the sound or the lyrics or anything like that?
I didn't have much, to be honest, and because obviously I anticipated this. But the only song I didn't like was Sea of Tears. I just found it a bit repetitive and quite derivative. It's trying to sound like everything else on the album.
Give me pleasure, give me pain. Take it all and back again. Tomorrow it's too late. Tomorrow it's gone. Been floating mistakes. I've been crying too long. I didn't seem to notice it creeping up on me. I was drowning in a sea of tears. Drowning in a sea of tears.
Because, you know, when you listen to something, you're getting into it, and then, I don't know if you think the same, but sometimes I just go, what is this? Like halfway through the song, you just go, what is this? And you just finish it off. But then the track after that is one of my favorites. So there you go. I think it's just something, if you own the vinyl record, you won't skip it or anything like that. But if it's on Spotify, I'd probably skip it from now on. But I just found it a bit...
it sounded a bit like a demo to me. Like it wasn't quite, the chorus wasn't quite figured out yet.
Yeah. I like that.
I agree. I think it's like the album is actually divided in two, because the first 6 songs, I believe, they're pretty strong, and you kind of get into them and like, yeah, I'm liking this. And then after the 7th song, I think you go like, oh, but that's the end. That's the end of it. So
I really liked.
I felt.
But one of my favorite songs is track 9. Yeah, I thought Driving Me was a good ending, so I disagree with her.
No, for me it was like the beginning was amazing. I said, oh my God, I'm liking every song, and I really got into it. And then by the end I was like, yeah, okay. for the last 2 to 3 songs, yes.
I like Driving Me as well. I think Driving Me is a good closer, because I feel like a lot of bands throw the slow song or the experimental song at the end, and I like that this is just a concise. And you mentioned the length earlier, Federica. Like, this is a really good length, 40 minutes. Boom. None of these songs overstay their welcome. Talking Back is a little bit long, but I don't punish it for that. But like, this is ideal.
5.5 minutes.
I think having the LP version probably helped them not fall into the CD trap, because if this was just a CD release, they might have thrown another 5 songs on here. But since you had
just to interject, Talking Back, there was actually a radio edit of 3.5 minutes that was the only single released. So
really,
what? That was their single?
On the CD single and the 12-inch, apparently track 1 and track 2, the same tracks, but one's the radio edit, one's the LP version. So there you go. Put that
like
on
the
the
least single worthy song on the record. It's like very
Germany only, of course. Germany only release.
It's like almost like a dance track. I mean, it's the least like pop song structured song on the record. It's kind of a lot of like repeating and
so cut it down. Like, 5.5 minutes seems a bit long. So
there's no dynamic to that song,
right? Maybe it was like a club song or something.
Oh yeah, maybe they did like a 12-inch remix for the clubs. I don't know.
We've got an interesting story. How we've got them on vinyl, except for this album actually. But we're in York, which is York, middle of the UK, and and York is actually a walled city. So we're walking around this wall, pretty cool. And of course, wherever we go, I've got to go on Discogs and see where all the record stores are, because I don't know if you use the map, but
I've seen it. Yes,
we plan our trips.
We plan our trips and craft beer. But we did a search and we went to a couple, and then we happened to be walking around the wall, and we happened just to stop. And I went looking down, and I went, "There's a record store," and it wasn't on the map. And we went in there. There's this the store's the size of someone's small bedroom.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they had 4 of their albums on vinyl for, like £5 to £8 each. And of course we bought them. It was like someone had obviously sold their collection, except for the last album. And of course, you buy them. You just don't often see that nowadays. Everything ends up on eBay or Discogs, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But walking into a store, you just go, hell yeah, I'm going to buy these. Even though I hadn't heard at that time, probably the 3rd or 4th album. Well, maybe once, but it was just like, let's get them, because you never see this kind of stuff. So it was pretty cool going to York and I'll take them all.
And
Like somebody had offloaded their whole collection or something.
Sorry?
So like someone had offloaded their whole collection there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And the guy wasn't even selling on eBay or Discogs. So
Not at all.
That's the best. And he isn't affected by the Discogs price inflation.
Yeah.
And he's just, it must be the wall around York. It must block out Discogs. Is that an old wall? Is that like a castle wall from hundreds of years ago? Excellent.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
That's my jam right there. I like watching those shows on Netflix about castles.
And most of it's still there. So, if you walk the whole thing, it would take you a good hour. So
that's cool.
Great city. Recommend it.
So if you were to pick a record from the full catalog, I know this is the only one in the 90s. Which one would you have picked? Is there a record in the 80s that's better?
I'd have to do the obvious. The debut is just really good. It was my introduction to the band. So, and it's kind of sets the scene for the band. Like, I don't think they changed much from their sound, but they just seem to, on the next subsequent release, just, somehow change it up, and it keeps your interest. So, so talk about the weather. And that's only 8 tracks, So,
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. You were talking about this earlier, Tim. This is the Rhino Records release. So it's the 4 CDs. It doesn't include Blasting Off, but it's got like all the B-sides and everything.
Nice.
I think we picked this up for like 10 quid, which is about $15. So
right.
It's really good. It's in, I think it's Rhino, but I think it's Cherry Red Records who do it.
Cherry Red always puts out good stuff. Yeah. That's where I got the Marion. Their 2 albums came out with like every B-side and live track and everything, and I picked those up.
I like it's the clamshell, and there's always a booklet in there, and we got the same for Sad Lovers and Giants and the Sound. So I don't mind buying the Essence. So Essence is another band like the Snake Corpse and Sad Lovers and Giants. So
the Essence sounds very much like an 80s goth new wave.
They sound like the Cure.
They sound like
yes. They sound exactly.
We are the Essence.
So you know who they are. Oh, great.
Breathe us in.
Yeah.
I think they are super popular in Spain. They love them.
Really?
Probably more than the Cure.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
That's crazy. Jay, so listening to this, knowing this came out in 91, 92, knowing that this was apparently going to be, they made the record in the US. They had a CD at some point out in the US, but I cannot imagine this. Maybe the college radio would have caught onto this a little bit, depending if they had some promotion, but then the band broke up immediately. So like, I don't even know who would want to be promoting it, because they're not going to be touring. They're not going to do any radio appearances or anything like that. So like, I mean, you're pretty much screwed from the start, but like musically, this would be a hard sell. Except for like college radio specialty shows, maybe.
I'd agree.
I heard some similarities to, like I mentioned, some shoegaze. There are moments on this record where it gets close to a Catherine Wheel vibe for me. I think the problem, so that would work really well in the US in 91 from a college radio standpoint. My Bloody Valentine, even, like, you could hear some of these songs being in that space and working well in the US. I think the issue is that that's not most of the record. I think the record has more than that to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And those bands, don't do that. Like, that whole genre is about, like, this is our sound. Every song is like this. Like, that's what you're paying for, right? It's 40 minutes of this. And that's not what this record is. I think there's too much variety. So it would be a head scratcher beyond a couple of tracks, I think, for that audience. But that was my only thought of like, how does this find some level of, success or breakthrough in the US? And it's
Right.
probably that avenue in 91.
Yeah. And if you think about the contemporaries that we were talking about with regards to either the more new wave-ish end with like Simple Minds or Psychedelic Furs, or then like a band like The Mission, those bands weren't like huge anymore by the time that 90, 91,
Right.
92 rolls around. Like this was very out of style. Richard Butler was like, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm just going to start another band
Right.
with my brother and try something else. Try to be a little more American with the production, essentially. But yeah, this would have been a tough one to find, quite honestly, at the time. And then throwing the weird album cover on, you're not doing it any favors. So,
I'd like to know the story of why they released it in the US 2 years later. Like, what was the thinking? Someone must have, just gone, "Yep, great idea. Let's do it." The band's no longer, but let's do it.
I wonder if like the catalog just got purchased or something, and they were like, "Well, let's just throw everything out because everything alternative is selling now."
Yeah.
So let's see what happens if we just put it on the market.
Yeah.
Because I cannot figure out why that would be.
Yeah.
The situation. But oh well. Let's get into our overall ratings on this record, Jay. Is it a worthy album, better EP, or a decent single? Where do you land?
It's a worthy album. I need to get a better version of it, or see if your version of it sounds better than what's on streaming, because it's a huge issue for me in enjoying it. But I think the sound of the band is unique. I love it. It's hitting that late 80s, early 90s place in a really successful way. And we often can't say that. A lot of bands struggled in this time transitioning from the 80s to the 90s and trying to figure out what their sound's going to be. And I think they nail a lot of cool elements that are, both kind of experimental, atmospheric, but also super catchy. I mean, I'm surprised, like one listen to this record, I found myself walking around the house, like humming or remembering hooks from this record, which I didn't anticipate, honestly. And, as I get older, this style, I think, of music, this style of vocal is, for whatever reason, appealing to me and connects really well. So it's also a cool find in that way. Anytime I can find bands that are have this sound, but also carry with them like strong songwriting and melodic sensibilities, that's usually a sweet spot for me. So despite some of the sound issues I have with it, I think it's a worthy album. How about you?
I concur. It's a worthy album for me. There's a lot to like about it with regards to what you said. I also think that this just has a cool energy to it. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's up tempo for the most part. I think Chris Reed has a cool delivery. In the same way that, like, it's not going to connect with everybody. In the same way that, like, what's his name from Girls Against Boys? Like, you either like that vocal or you don't like that vocal, because it's very specific.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this just works and I think if the wrong music was backing him, it would not work, but he's able to find the exact right tone of everything, whether it's the guitars, and there are some effects on the guitars that are cool, little things here and there that he's doing that all adds up to just a really interesting and unique sound that pulls from a lot of different things that you're familiar with, but it all comes together in kind of a unique way here. It's a cool record that you can listen to over and over again, as it doesn't feel that tired. It sounds fresh in a way that I did not expect, which is
there are bands,
cool.
like new bands, trying the sound again. So from that aspect, it did sound kind of contemporary, even though it's, you can almost see it as like a retro thing. Like a new band could have this sound and be calling back to the 80s and early 90s.
Yep. What about the two of you? Are we in the ballpark? Worthy album?
Yeah, definitely worthy album. Take out, I'll listen less to Sea of Tears, but hey, it's not that bad.
It's an album track.
Sorry?
It's an album track. We got to get the album tracks, at some point.
But no, I agree with you. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's 40 minutes. But I like how they did keep their sound, but they kept it fresh each subsequent album. For me, the previous album is called Blow, and that's the one I least listened to. It's kind of a step down for me. But I like how they I don't know why they went to LA to record this, but I'm glad that they didn't change their production style where, the guy, whoever the producer was, went, look, we've got to do this because everyone else is doing this. I'm glad they stayed true to their sound, and for me, they went out on a bang, well, a blast, pun intended. I'm just, and it does sound fresh, doesn't it? It does not sound dated. It sounds like it's from the 80s, because obviously all their whole entire output is the 80s, but for me it doesn't sound dated, and that's why I like going back to this.
I think it's a perfect example of post-punk. And by the way, guys, if we keep saying that they sound kind of goth, they will get pretty upset.
They don't like that, apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently, he said in a podcast, he said, we were punk with the accent.
Yeah, we were punk
with the accent from the north. England. So they actually stated it. They felt punk, and their sound is definitely post-punk.
Yeah, it was Dave Wolfram, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
They said they were influenced by Wire, and you mentioned the Stooges earlier, but he said the MC5. So the MC5 and Stooges they're pretty similar. So you're bang on, Tim. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear the post-punk. I guess when I think of post-punk, I think of a little bit more minimalism. Like you mentioned Wire. Wire can be real stripped down, and minimalistic. Same thing with like Gang of Four, where every instrument is like so separated and abrasive. Whereas this just has there is a mood that you can't necessarily easily come by that this record creates. Which I think is why it gets that goth tag, because it's the deep voice and there's some, reverb and all that kind of stuff. So it is kind of, I can understand why they would think it's like a lazy comparison to say, oh, it's just a goth band. But, sometimes people who are listening with fresh ears that haven't been in the band or in the studio or go, oh, you guys are making a goth record. And like, no, I'm not making that record. Like, well, that's what I hear. I'm sorry. Once you make it, I get to interpret it as I please. I don't have to stick to your, interpretation. But I would like to go back and hear the earlier stuff just to see, since they got, immediately pegged as goth sounding. I would like to know what the difference is between the first record and the last record in comparison. So luckily, I think that one, is that streaming? Can I go check out that one?
The first four are here. I'm just going to see, because obviously this box that I've got has all the extra B-sides and singles, because as I said, even though they formed in 81, they released 3 7-inches, which are not on the first album. So then they released 8 new tracks. So
what's the first album called?
Talk About the Weather.
So on Spotify, it's listed as, they have Talk About the Weather / Paint Your Wagon.
Released Paint Your Wagon is album number 3.
That's a compilation.
Or 2.
And it's released, it shows the released year is 1979. which doesn't make
Apple
any
Music
sense.
Has that as 94.
You're right. It says it on Spotify here as well. But Paint Your Wagon is the second album. And then, Blow is Nothing Wrong 88, Blow 89. So.
Yeah, Apple Music has
86, 85, then 86, 88, 89. Like these albums were pumped out. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. In the 80s, people.
But there was a lot of
faster.
Well, there's
there was like an EP as well that was not on an album. Like none of the tracks were on the album. So there's a lot for you to discover, because when I got that box set, it was like, oh my God, there's so many more tracks. Like the first album is 8 tracks, but there's like another 10 or so other tracks, B-sides, other singles, non-LP singles. So
I understand where that album cover came from with regards to the trucks, the red and the yellow. That was like their first 7-inch. So they must have reused the artwork for the singles collection or the very best of collection. Because it's the same thing.
And
so
the
they
version
repurposed.
of Talk About the Weather on Apple Music has like you said, Darren, an extra 10 tracks or so,
Yeah.
bonus tracks.
Just looking at the back of the box, yeah, like CD1 is 19 tracks, CD2 is 22 tracks, CD3 is 18, and the final one is 14. So there's plenty of extra tracks to discover.
Well, thank you for bringing this record to us, because we definitely would not have located it on our own. And though it did fail in the poll, I'm glad you rescued it, because this was a cool record for us to check out.
I threw it in there, but yeah, obviously you want to throw stuff in the hopper, so people want, try and discover it as well. Like there's plenty I don't know in any of these polls, but I just make sure I go to Spotify, like Love Battery, for example. I never heard of them before, which is odd, but love that record, for example.
Right.
So I hope people went out and just had a listen. Like Gav.
Yeah.
Hold on, Gav.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I've been pleasantly surprised. That was voting seems to be also spending time listening to the records, which is cool. At least sampling them on YouTube or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Let Us to Clear I'd never heard of, and I liked most of the album. There were some tracks I didn't thought fit on the album, but liked it. I went, that's pretty cool.
So you didn't hear their bigger single, Here and Now, when that came out? Was that not a big thing in the UK or Australia?
Well, obviously I would have been in Australia when that came out. So
interesting.
Problem is, it's so long ago. So long ago.
Yeah.
But when I heard it, I don't think my ears had heard that before. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, for the folks listening at home, if you would like to suggest an album that ends up in one of our polls, you can do so by going to digmeoutpodcast.com and going to the suggest an album page. You just dropped your name in there, or your email address and your name, or did you even put your name? Yeah, you put your name, Jay, right? We know who suggests these things.
Yes, and you also have to pitch why we should review it.
Yes, so just to give us a couple lines and say, I think this is a cool record that you guys haven't talked about. Please make sure to check our archive, because I have noticed that stuff comes in and they're like, you should check out this album. Like we did that 14 years ago.
Yeah. Try to follow up when we can with a link to the review, but yeah, it's worth doing a quick search in the search bar to make sure we haven't already reviewed it.
And you can vote on those album review tournaments, 9 albums a week for 3 weeks. And then the final 6 make it into the Tournament of Champions by becoming a union member at Patreon. You go to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com to become a patron member. It's also where you can read the box newsletter. Every week, our newsletter comes out with all the new releases relevant to 80s, 90s, and aughts music. Reviews of albums, mostly books, documentaries, TV shows, anything that comes out that's relevant to our podcast, we'll throw it on the calendar and we'll maybe do a couple reviews. Sometimes our patrons submit the reviews, which is nice because then I have less work to do. And I like doing less work. And
often they're more qualified to review the records that they're reviewing than we are. But
if somebody has a specialty, I prefer that they cover that, because I don't necessarily have the vocabulary to talk about every record. Although I'm trying to expand. Like the most recent one I did electronic record. I did Orbital. And then I did a melodic death metal album, In Flames.
I saw that. You do a lot of metal.
I find myself
proud of you,
wanting to do that because I do like metal. It's just sometimes the vocals don't work for me.
Yep.
In Flames was interesting because it was both a screamy record and a melodic record. So that was cool. I gave it you'll have to read the review at Box to find out how I discussed it. And lastly, Apple Podcasts. If you like the show, leave us some positive feedback. Darren, Federica, thank you so much for joining us on this show. This was a pleasure on our Sundays. I'm going to go and do something Sunday-ish, like some laundry. And I hope you guys have a nice evening. I don't know what shows are on here. We would watch 60 Minutes and then maybe Murder, She Wrote. That's our typical Sunday evening. Maybe we would watch Dukes of Hazzard. on Sunday evenings leading
The Simpsons
into.
used to be in Australia.
Yep.
I remember that 6 o'clock or something, 7 o'clock.
Yep.
Yeah,
Simpsons,
we got
yep,
The
that was here too.
Simpsons, and then Jay, anything else I'm missing on our Sunday evening watches that was key?
Well, Game
to
of Thrones, obviously.
Well, that's yes.
Trying to think
Whatever the prestige HBO show is, at
right, the
time.
prestige
Arliss,
HBO show,
or the Larry Sanders Show,
6 Feet Under.
6 Feet Under. Yes, that was always our Sunday viewing. Perhaps some Tales from the Crypt.
Yes. Wow.
So whatever you're enjoying tonight, I hope it's as good as that.
We haven't decided what we're watching yet. But,
Okay.
We normally go to Netflix or Amazon Prime, whatever it is, for our viewing purposes.
And then look through thumbnails for half an hour.
Yeah.
Like, what do you want to watch? I don't know.
Netflix
I don't know.
is not good of late. I think we were flicking through last night, and it was just. I think we actually didn't watch anything. Like,
Yeah.
You just flip through for a half hour, go and right for bed.
Yeah.
I do the same thing with Netflix.
You know what I do now? I go to YouTube, and I will just like throw on, like, I don't want to watch a whole episode of Saturday Night Live, so I'll just watch like one little clip that's actually funny.
Yeah.
You know?
It's not that funny, is it? That show.
No, it's like 3 out of 10 skits are actually funny.
Yeah, that's it.
So if you can just watch the highlights, then that's the way to go.
No, I agree. But 30% is not a pass, is it? You know.
No, but somehow it stays on the air.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like there's some sort of like deal with NBC where like they can never take that show off the air. Like it's just it's like it's got a clause. Like if it goes down, the whole network goes down. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys.
This was a blast to steal from the album title. And I'm going to sign us off and say, for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.
This is me.